A single mother loses her home to a bank foreclosure, except she never missed a payment. A veteran watches his life savings vanish into fraudulent fees he never authorized. An elderly couple discovers their mortgage was sold 6 times, each sale generating illegal profits while their payments disappeared into a black hole. These aren't isolated incidents. They're part of a systematic scheme by Apex National Bank, one of America's largest financial institutions, to defraud thousands of ordinary Americans out of millions of dollars. The victims had no power, no resources, and no hope until one lawyer decided to take on the impossible. This is the story of how a determined attorney named Mike uncovered a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of corporate America, and his fight to hold an unaccountable bank responsible for destroying lives. The system failed these people. But can one man bring down an empire built on their suffering? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The office was quiet, except for the hum of the air conditioning and the occasional shuffle of papers. Mike sat behind his desk, his expression serious, as he reviewed a stack of documents. Across from him, a journalist leaned forward, recorder in hand, ready to capture every word. So, Mike, I have to ask, when did you first realize this wasn't just another foreclosure case? Mike looked up, his eyes reflecting the weight of what he was about to share. It was 3 years ago. A woman named Kendall Harper walked into my office. She was in her mid-40s, worked 2 jobs as a nurse and a weekend retail clerk, single mother of 2 teenagers. She came in with a foreclosure notice from Apex National Bank. At first glance, it seemed straightforward. Banks foreclose on properties every day, but Kendall insisted something was wrong. She had bank statements, canceled checks, everything showing she'd made every single payment on time for 7 years. That must happen sometimes, though, right? Clerical errors. Mike nodded slowly. That's what I thought initially. I told her we'd file a dispute, get the bank to review their records, sort it out. Should have taken maybe 2 weeks, a month at most. But when we contacted Apex, they stonewalled us. Wouldn't provide payment history, wouldn't show where her payments had gone, just kept insisting she was in default. Then they accelerated the foreclosure process. The journalist's eyes widened. They sped it up? Exactly. That's when I knew something was very wrong. Banks don't rush foreclosures when someone's actively disputing them with documented proof of payment. It's legal exposure they don't need. So I dug deeper. I subpoenaed their records. And what I found was stunning. Kendall's payments had been recorded in their system, every single one of them. But they'd been systematically reassigned to something called suspense accounts, basically financial limbo, where the money just sat there, not credited to her mortgage. Why would they do that? Mike leaned back in his chair. That's exactly what I asked myself. It made no sense from a business perspective. You're generating defaults on performing loans, taking losses on foreclosure proceedings. It's completely irrational unless there's something else going on. So I started looking at other foreclosure cases Apex had filed in our county. I found 12 more in 6 months. I reached out to those homeowners. 8 of them had the exact same story. Payments made, bank claim default, immediate foreclosure acceleration. The journalist whistled softly. That's a pattern. It's a pattern, but it's not proof of intent. Not yet. I needed to understand the motive. So I brought in a financial analyst, a guy named Parker Grant, who used to work in mortgage-backed securities. I had him look at how Apex was handling these loans. What he found was disturbing. Every one of these mortgages had been sold and resold multiple times to investors as part of mortgage-backed securities. Each time the loan was sold, it generated fees for Apex. But here's the critical part. When a loan goes into default and gets foreclosed, Apex had insurance policies that covered the losses. They were getting paid twice, once from investors buying the performing loan, and again from insurance when they deliberately triggered defaults, so they were manufacturing defaults for profit. Mike's jaw tightened. Exactly. But it gets worse. Parker discovered that Apex had a quota system for their loan servicing department. Employees were actually incentivized to move performing loans into default status. They got bonuses based on how many foreclosures they initiated. We found internal emails where managers were congratulating teams for meeting their foreclosure targets. The journalist sat back, stunned. That's criminal. It should be. But here's where the system failed. Banking regulations are incredibly complex, and Apex had layers of corporate structure designed to obscure accountability. The loan servicing was done by a subsidiary. The insurance claims were filed by another subsidiary. The securities were sold through a third entity. On paper, it all looked like separate business operations. Nobody could be held directly responsible because the company had built in plausible deniability at every level. So, what did you do? Mike smiled grimly. I did what lawyers do when the system fails. I found the people it failed. I started tracking down every homeowner in our state who'd been foreclosed by Apex in the past 5 years. We sent out over 300 letters. 74 people responded. Of those, 41 had the exact same pattern: payments made, improper defaults, rushed foreclosures, lives destroyed, families torn apart. I met a veteran named Austin Ford who'd come home from deployment to find his house had been sold at auction while he was serving overseas. Apex had his military status in their records. They foreclosed anyway, in direct violation of federal law. The journalist's face flushed with anger. How is this bank still operating? Because they're enormous. Apex National Bank has assets worth over $400 billion. They employ 15,000 people. They donate to politicians on both sides of the aisle. When I filed the first lawsuit on behalf of Kendall Harper, their legal team filed a motion to dismiss before they'd even reviewed the evidence. When that failed, they buried us in discovery requests. Thousands of documents, endless depositions, procedural delays. They were trying to exhaust our resources, make it too expensive to continue. But you didn't stop. Mike's expression hardened. I couldn't stop, because by then I'd met these people. I'd sat in their living rooms, seen the boxes they were packing, watched mothers explain to their children why they had to leave the only home they'd ever known. Apex wasn't just stealing houses. They were destroying the fundamental belief that if you work hard and play by the rules, you'll be protected. They were proving that the system doesn't work for ordinary people. The journalist leaned forward again. So, how did you fight back against a $400 billion bank? Mike opened a folder on his desk and pulled out a single document. This is an internal Apex memo from 2 years ago. It's from the Senior Vice President of Risk Management to the CEO. It explicitly acknowledges that their loan servicing practices were generating illegal foreclosures, and it recommends they continue the practice because the profit margin outweighed potential legal exposure. They knew they were destroying lives, and they calculated it was worth it. Where did you get that? Mike's eyes gleamed. That's a story for part 2, but I'll tell you this much. Someone inside Apex decided they'd had enough of being complicit in fraud. Someone with access to everything. Who was the insider that risked everything to expose Apex? And what explosive evidence did they provide that would finally hold the bank accountable? Quick pause. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time. So, if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. The journalist was on the edge of his seat. So someone inside the bank became a whistleblower? Mike nodded. His name is Tristan Boyd. He was a senior auditor in Apex's Loan Quality Control Department. His job was to review foreclosure files to ensure they met legal standards before they went to court. For 3 years, he flagged files that had problems, loans where payments had been misapplied, where documentation was falsified, where federal protections had been violated. And for 3 years, his supervisors overrode his objections and pushed the foreclosures through anyway. What made him finally come forward? Mike's voice softened. He reviewed a file for a woman named Luna Stevens. She was 72 years old, widow, living on Social Security and her late husband's pension. She'd paid off 80% of her mortgage over 23 years, never missed a payment. But Apex's system had a glitch that double-charged her 1 month, which created a shortage in her escrow account. Instead of contacting her to resolve a $60 discrepancy, they declared her in default and started foreclosure proceedings. Tristan flagged it immediately, sent it back with a detailed memo explaining the error. His supervisor sent it through anyway. Luna lost her home over $60. Mike paused, his hands clasped tightly together. Tristan went to the foreclosure auction. He watched Luna's house sell for a fraction of its value. He saw her standing outside with her belongings in trash bags, crying. And something broke in him. He realized he wasn't just reviewing files. He was part of a machine that was deliberately destroying people's lives for profit. So he started making copies. Every flagged file he'd been overruled on. Every email where management told him to approve fraudulent foreclosures. Every internal report that showed executives knew exactly what was happening. That's incredibly dangerous. Whistleblowers at major banks don't exactly have a great track record. The journalist was right to be concerned. Tristan knew what he was risking. He'd seen what happened to other employees who raised concerns. They were marginalized, pushed out, blacklisted from the industry. But he contacted me anyway, walked into this office 6 months ago with 4 external hard drives containing over 50,000 documents, bank records, emails, recorded phone calls, internal audits, everything. The journalist's eyes went wide. 50,000 documents? Mike smiled. It was overwhelming at first. But Parker Grant, my financial analyst, he built a database to organize everything. We spent 3 months going through it all, and what we found was staggering. This wasn't just a rogue department or a few bad actors. This was a systematic top-down conspiracy to defraud homeowners across the entire country. We found foreclosure quotas in 17 different regional offices. We found emails from the CFO praising executives for maximizing insurance recovery through strategic default management. We found a PowerPoint presentation given to the board of directors showing projected revenue from what they called aggressive loan resolution. They presented fraud to the board as a business strategy. Mike's voice was hard. They called it maximizing asset recovery. But yes, that's exactly what it was. And here's the most damning part. We found communications with their external auditors, the firm that's supposed to independently verify their financial practices. Apex had explicitly told them about the foreclosure scheme, and the auditors had advised them on how to structure it to minimize regulatory scrutiny. The watchdogs were helping them get away with it. The journalist looked sick. So the entire system was complicit. The entire system was complicit. That's why I titled this case the way I did. The system failed at every level. The bank failed its customers. The regulators failed to catch obvious fraud. The auditors failed to report it. The politicians failed to create meaningful oversight. And the courts failed because Apex could afford lawyers that ordinary people couldn't match. But Tristan's evidence changed everything. For the first time, we had proof of intentional wrongdoing that went all the way to the executive suite. What did you do with it? Mike pulled out another folder. We filed an amended class action lawsuit representing over 400 homeowners across 6 states. We attached 50 pages of exhibits showing the systematic nature of the fraud. And we didn't just sue Apex. We sued the executives by name: the CEO, the CFO, the head of loan servicing, the regional VPs who enforced the quotas. We pierced the corporate veil and went after the individuals who designed and implemented this scheme. How did Apex respond? Mike's smile was grim. They panicked. Within 48 hours, they filed an emergency motion to seal the entire case, claiming the documents contained trade secrets and proprietary business information. They argued that making the evidence public would cause irreparable harm to the bank. Their lawyers showed up with a team of 15 attorneys and tried to intimidate the judge into keeping everything under wraps. Did it work? Mike shook his head. The judge was a woman named Victoria Chen, been on a bench for 20 years. She read our complaint, looked at Apex's motion, and said something I'll never forget. She said the only irreparable harm she could see was the harm Apex had already caused to 400 families, and the public had a right to know what one of America's largest banks had been doing with their customers' money. She denied the motion to seal and ordered Apex to respond to our allegations within 30 days. The journalist grinned. That must have felt good. It felt like justice might actually be possible. But Apex wasn't done fighting. They filed an immediate appeal, tried to get Judge Chen recused, claimed bias. They leaked stories to friendly media outlets, suggesting our clients were simply deadbeats trying to avoid legitimate debts. They hired crisis management firms to flood social media with counter-narratives. And, most disturbingly, Tristan started receiving threats. What kind of threats? Mike's expression darkened. Anonymous emails telling him to withdraw his cooperation. His car was vandalized. Someone broke into his apartment, didn't steal anything, just left everything overturned so he'd know they'd been there. Tristan has 2 young kids. One day his daughter came home from school crying because a stranger had approached her on the playground and told her that her daddy was a bad man who hurt people. The journalist looked horrified. Did you Go to the police. We did. Filed reports, requested investigations. But these weren't amateurs. No physical evidence. No witnesses. Nothing that could be traced back to anyone. Tristan wanted to quit, take his family, and disappear. I couldn't blame him. But then something happened that changed everything. Mike leaned forward, his voice dropping. One of Apex's board members reached out to me privately. His name is Victor Malone. Been in banking for 40 years, respected industry veteran. He asked to meet off the record. I almost didn't go, thought it might be a setup. But Parker convinced me to at least hear him out. So, I met Victor at a coffee shop in a different city. Took every precaution. And he told me something that made my blood run cold. What did he say? Mike's eyes were intense. He said the CEO and CFO had presented a plan to the board to settle our lawsuit quietly, pay out the 400 plaintiffs, make them sign non-disclosure agreements, and bury the whole thing, business as usual. But Victor had voted against it. He argued they needed to acknowledge wrongdoing, reform their practices, compensate everyone they'd harmed, not just the people who'd sued them. He was outvoted 8-1. And then, 2 days after that board meeting, he received a visit from Apex's head of security, former FBI agent. Very professional. The man told Victor that the bank had become aware of certain personal indiscretions in his past, nothing illegal, but potentially embarrassing, and it would be unfortunate if that information became public. They threatened a board member? They threatened a board member, Mike repeated. Victor realized then that this went beyond fraud. The people running Apex were willing to destroy anyone who threatened their scheme, whether it was homeowners, whistleblowers, or even their own board members. He came to me because he believed we might be the only chance to stop them, and he brought something with him. The journalist was barely breathing. What evidence did the insider board member provide? And how would it expose just how far Apex was willing to go to protect their criminal enterprise? The journalist leaned even closer, his voice urgent. What did Victor bring you? Mike opened a secure drawer in his desk and carefully pulled out a thin manila envelope. Inside this envelope is a recording from a closed-door executive session that happened 6 weeks ago. Victor wore a wire to the meeting. On this recording, you can hear the CEO, a man named Reggie Bishop, and the CFO discussing our lawsuit, but they're not discussing legal strategy or settlement terms. They're discussing how to neutralize the threat we represent. Neutralize? What does that mean? Mike's expression was grave. Reggie Bishop explicitly says, and I quote, "We need to make this problem disappear before it reaches discovery." He then discusses 3 options. Option 1, offer massive settlements to our lead plaintiffs individually. Enough money that they'd be financially set for life, in exchange for withdrawing from the class action and signing NDAs. Option 2, use their political connections to pressure the judge, maybe get the case moved to a friendlier jurisdiction. And option 3, this is the disturbing part, find leverage on me personally or on Tristan Boyd that would force us to abandon the case entirely. The journalist's face went pale. They were planning to blackmail you? Or worse, the CFO, a man named Matthew Moore, responds on the tape saying they've already hired a private investigation firm to dig into my background, my finances, my family, looking for anything they could use. He mentions they've identified what he calls pressure points. My elderly mother, who lives on a fixed income, my sister who's going through a difficult divorce, a malpractice case I handled early in my career that didn't go well. They were building a file on me. That's conspiracy. That's criminal intimidation. It absolutely is, and Victor knew that once he heard it. That's why he came forward. He realized the institution he'd served for decades had become genuinely dangerous. These weren't bankers anymore. They were criminals willing to do whatever it took to protect their fraud scheme. So, what did you do with the recording? Mike smiled slightly. I did something they didn't expect. Instead of going to the media or leaking it online, I took it directly to the FBI. See, the moment Apex started discussing ways to obstruct our lawsuit and intimidate witnesses, they crossed from civil fraud into federal crimes. Obstruction of justice, witness tampering, conspiracy to commit extortion. The FBI's Financial Crimes Unit opened an investigation immediately. The bank is under federal investigation now. As of 3 weeks ago, yes. But here's what makes this complicated. The FBI moves slowly, deliberately. They want an airtight case before they make any moves. In the meantime, Apex doesn't know they're under investigation. They think they're still in control. And that created an opportunity. What kind of opportunity? Mike's eyes gleamed. We let them think their intimidation tactics were working. I had a colleague reach out to Apex's lawyers suggesting I might be willing to discuss a confidential resolution. They took the bait immediately, set up a meeting for next week where they think they're going to pressure me into a settlement that protects them. But what they don't know is that meeting will be recorded and FBI agents will be listening to every word. If they make threats, offer bribes, or admit to any of the conduct we've alleged, they'll be handing federal prosecutors everything they need. The journalist's eyes widened with understanding. You're setting a trap. We're giving them enough rope to hang themselves. But Mike's expression turned serious. Here's the problem. Tristan Boyd doesn't know about the FBI investigation yet. For his own protection and to maintain operational security, we couldn't tell him. But the threats against him and his family have escalated. 2 nights ago, someone slashed all 4 tires on his car and left a note on his windshield that said, "Last warning." He's terrified, and I can't tell him that federal agents are already building a case that will protect him. Can't you tell him now? Mike shook his head slowly. The FBI explicitly instructed me not to. They're worried that if word gets out, Apex will destroy evidence or flee. We're days away from either the biggest takedown of banking fraud in a decade or watching these criminals walk free because we tipped our hand too early. Would Tristan hold on long enough for the FBI trap to work? Or would Apex's escalating threats force him to disappear before justice could be served? The journalist's voice was tight with concern. So what happened? Did Tristan make it to the meeting? Mike exhaled slowly, the memory clearly weighing on him. The night before the scheduled meeting with Apex's lawyers, I got a call at 2 a.m. It was Tristan. He was crying, barely coherent. He said his wife had just received a phone call from someone claiming to be from Child Protective Services, saying they'd received reports of abuse and would be investigating their family. It was fake, of course, but his wife didn't know that. She was hysterical, terrified they were going to take their kids. That's absolutely evil. Mike's jaw clenched. I made a decision in that moment that could have destroyed everything. I drove to Tristan's house at 3 a.m. and told him everything. About the FBI investigation, about Victor's recording, about the trap we were setting. I violated direct FBI instructions because I wasn't going to let an innocent man suffer one more minute of psychological torture. How did he react? Tristan broke down completely. 3 years of carrying this weight, months of living in fear, and suddenly learning that help was actually coming, that he hadn't been abandoned. But then he said something that changed the entire trajectory of the case. He told me there was more evidence, something he'd held back because it was too dangerous to reveal. What was it? Mike leaned forward intently. Tristan had discovered that Apex wasn't just defrauding individual homeowners. They were also manipulating the mortgage-backed securities they sold to investors. Remember, these loans were packaged and sold to pension funds, retirement accounts, institutional investors. Apex was certifying these securities as high-quality, low-risk investments. But Tristan had internal documents showing they knew a significant percentage of the underlying mortgages were either fraudulent or being deliberately pushed into default. They were selling toxic assets while claiming they were pristine. That's securities fraud on a massive scale. Exactly. We're not talking about 400 homeowners anymore. We're talking about billions of dollars in fraudulent securities sold to thousands of investors, including teacher pension funds, union retirement accounts, ordinary people's 401ks. The scope of the crime was exponentially larger than we'd realized. Why didn't Tristan tell you this before? He was terrified. Securities fraud brings in the SEC, federal prosecutors, potentially international authorities if foreign investors were involved. He thought if he revealed that level of criminality, Apex would have him killed. Not harassed, not intimidated, actually killed. And honestly, after everything I'd seen, I couldn't tell him he was wrong to be afraid. So, what did you do? Mike's voice became resolute. I called the FBI agent in charge of the investigation, a woman named Special Agent Jennifer Torres. I told her we had evidence of securities fraud that expanded the case into federal securities law violations. She arrived at Tristan's house within an hour with 2 other agents. They put Tristan and his family into protective custody that same morning, moved them to a safe location, gave them new phones, around-the-clock protection, and the meeting with Apex, that's where it gets interesting. The FBI decided to go forward with it, but with a modification. They wanted me to wear a wire and try to get Reggie Bishop himself to attend the meeting. If we could get the CEO on tape making threats or offering bribes directly to me, combined with Tristan's securities fraud evidence, they'd have enough to arrest the entire executive team. That's incredibly dangerous. If they suspected anything, if they searched you and found the wire. Mike nodded grimly. I know. My hands were shaking when I walked into that conference room. It was in a private office building Apex rented specifically for sensitive meetings. No security cameras, no witnesses. Their head lawyer was there, along with Matthew Moore, the CFO, and, to my shock, Reggie Bishop himself. He'd taken the bait. What did they say? Reggie started by offering me $10 million. Not for my clients, for me personally. He said I'd clearly worked hard on this case, that I deserved to be compensated for my time, and that we could make everything go away quietly. When I refused, his tone changed completely. He leaned across the table and said he knew things about me, about my family, about mistakes I'd made years ago. He said it would be tragic if that information became public, if it destroyed my reputation and my career. He was openly threatening you. He was, and every word was being recorded. But then Matthew Moore made it even worse. He pulled out a folder and started listing the names of my other clients, people who had nothing to do with this case. He said Apex had significant influence in the legal community, that they could make sure none of my clients ever got fair treatment in any court in the state. He was threatening to destroy my entire practice unless I capitulated. How did Mike respond to these direct threats? And would the FBI have enough evidence to finally bring down Apex's criminal empire? The journalist was gripping his recorder tightly. "What did you say to them?" Mike's voice was steady, almost calm. I looked Reggie Bishop directly in the eyes and told him that I'd spent my entire career believing the legal system could deliver justice, even when it was difficult, even when powerful people didn't want it to. I said that men like him had spent decades proving that belief was naive, that money and power could override truth and accountability. And then I told him that this time he was wrong. What happened next? Mike smiled slightly. Reggie's face went red. He started to say something threatening, but before he could finish his sentence, the doors opened and 6 FBI agents entered the room. Special Agent Torres walked right up to Reggie Bishop and told him he was under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, obstruction of justice, witness intimidation, and securities fraud. The look on his face, that moment when he realized he'd been caught, that everything he'd built was collapsing, I'll remember it for the rest of my life. They arrested him right there. Him, Matthew Moore, and 2 of their lawyers who were present for the threats. Within 6 hours, federal agents had executed search warrants at Apex headquarters in 4 different cities. They seized servers, documents, hard drives, everything. The next morning, the SEC suspended trading on Apex stock and announced a formal investigation. By that afternoon, 3 more executives had been arrested. The entire criminal enterprise collapsed in less than 24 hours. What about the homeowners? Your clients? That's the important part. 2 weeks after the arrests, the federal government announced a settlement with Apex National Bank. The bank was required to establish a compensation fund of $800 million for victims of their foreclosure fraud. Every homeowner who'd been illegally foreclosed received full compensation, including the value of their lost homes, relocation costs, and damages for emotional distress. Kendall Harper got her home back, plus $300,000. Austin Ford, the veteran, received over $500,000. Luna Stevens, the elderly woman whose case motivated Tristan, she got enough money to buy a new home outright and live comfortably for the rest of her life. And Tristan, is he safe now? Tristan and his family are in witness protection, but the immediate threat is gone. He testified before a grand jury, and his evidence was instrumental in securing indictments against 14 Apex executives. He'll eventually be able to return to a normal life. More importantly, his courage prevented this from continuing. Apex has been placed under federal oversight. Their practices are being completely reformed, and the regulatory agencies that failed to catch this are facing their own investigations. What about Reggie Bishop and the others? Mike's expression hardened. They're awaiting trial on multiple federal charges. The evidence is overwhelming. Between Victor's recording my wire and Tristan's 50,000 documents, federal prosecutors have everything they need. They're looking at decades in prison. But more than that, they've lost everything else. Their reputations, their wealth, their freedom. The system they thought they'd beaten finally held them accountable. The journalist sat back, processing everything. So the system didn't fail in the end? Mike was quiet for a moment. The system failed for years. It failed Kendall, Austin, Luna, and hundreds of others. It took a whistleblower risking everything, a board member violating confidentiality, and a lawyer willing to put his own safety on the line to make it work. That's not a functioning system. That's a broken system that occasionally gets forced to do the right thing. But I'll say this. When ordinary people refuse to give up, when they fight back against institutions that seem invincible, sometimes justice is possible. Not because the system works, but because people make it work. What's next for you? Mike gestured to a stack of files on his desk. I've received over 2,000 inquiries from people who think they've been victims of similar schemes at other banks. This isn't an isolated case. This is happening everywhere. So we keep fighting. We keep giving voice to the voiceless. We keep proving that power and money don't place anyone above the law. The journalist turned off his recorder and extended his hand. Thank you for sharing this story. Mike shook it firmly. Thank you for telling it. People need to know what happened here. They need to know that fighting back is possible. As the journalist gathered his things and prepared to leave, he paused at the door. One more question. Do you think this will change anything? Will other banks learn from this? Mike looked out the window at the city beyond, his voice thoughtful. Some will, others won't. But now they know that somewhere out there are lawyers willing to take them on, whistleblowers willing to risk everything, and a justice system that can still be forced to work when enough people demand it. And maybe that's enough to make them think twice before destroying another family's life for profit. Up next, 2 more incredible stories are waiting for you right on your screen. If you enjoy this one, you won't want to miss this. Just click to watch and don't forget to subscribe.